Finally, the video you guys have been waiting for what feels like months now. And the first question that probably popped up in your head is, Stefano, why do you have a Dell T30 in front of you? Well, first let me put up some smoke and mirrors and redirect your question with a different answer. This video was originally supposed to be about a Dell R710 being used as a remote backup server. And when I say remote, I mean at somebody else's place or somebody else's house. Now, that would have been all fine and dandy, but I ran into too many issues with my Dell R710. Now, for the record, the Dell R710 is usually a great recommended buy by people all over the internet for your first home server or for, a server to do simple tasks. So I'm not hating on it by any means. And there's tons of advantages of having an R710 over something like this. But why did I even buy this if all of that is true? Well, again, in my particular use case, I got to try out two different things because of some of the problems I experienced. So let's go ahead and first talk about why I ended up going with this over using the Dell R710 that is sitting on the rack. Now, first and foremost, I wanted to have a server that was reliable. An R710 is a workhorse. It would have been fine. I don't know much about the reliability of the T30, but Dell has a pretty, proven track record as far as workstations go. So this particular workstation is low power, which is really good, especially since it's going to be at somebody else's house. It uses approximately 80 watts idle. I'm not sure how much it uses when you have it fully loaded with hard drives and other PCI devices, but it should be pretty low power for the most part. And the second thing it has going for it is it's quiet. How quiet? Well, we'll explore that a little bit later. Thirdly, it comes with 8 gigabytes of ECC RAM and has a pretty modern CPU. Now, it's not the best by any means, as it's only a 4-core, 8-thread CPU, but it'll get the job done for a remote backup server. We don't really need anything incredibly powerful. And that's probably where all the good things stop for this thing. Oh, and maybe the warranty if you want to throw that in there. But that's really about it. Alright, so let's figure out why the R710 is actually the superior thing to buy besides its price, which is actually significantly cheaper. This particular configuration clocked in at about $189 after shipping and everything said. So first and foremost, one of the best things about this is hot swappable drive bays. You have 6 included with this particular model, and it's really easy to identify which hard drive needs to be replaced, which is a huge advantage, and you get blinking lights on the front. And who doesn't like all them flashy lights? I know I do. One of the other major advantages of this model is it has redundant power supplies. This actually has 2 570 watt power supplies. So if you have multiple UPSs, you can actually plug the backup one into another UPS and the primary one into a secondary UPS or primary UPS, whichever have you. So this thing can run forever on both of your ups if there's a power outage. Also, it has dual CPUs. Now, this particular model has 2 quad-core CPUs, which gives me 8 cores. They are non-hyper-threading cores, which isn't a big deal because my Dell T30 is also a quad-core, but with hyper-threading, which gives me a total of 8 threads. Now, another advantage of this particular CPU, and there are many, so I'll be saying the word advantage a lot here, is it has quad onboard NICs. So you get a little bit of resiliency or redundancy depending on how your network is configured. You also get 18 slots for RAM. In this case, I have currently plugged in 72 gigabytes of RAM. Now, you should note that there is actually a power issue. Well, maybe not necessarily an issue, but you'll get a notification from iDRAC saying that you're pulling too much power from your 570 watt PSUs. Now, I'm told that that's actually only an issue if you have the lower end PSUs, and if you have the higher end ones, it's not something or a message you'll see. And it's actually not an issue anyway because the server will boot up. But the only problem is that your RAM will only run at 800 megahertz, or maybe it was 300 megahertz. Doesn't matter. They don't run at their full speed, which is kind of a disadvantage. But if you remove the extra sticks, you'll be fine, and that's not a message you'll see. Moving on, another great thing is you get multiple PCI Express slots. The Dell only has 3 and PCI lanes, I believe, and 1 PCI 1.0. Not very great, but nice to have. And finally, or maybe not finally, but the last thing I can think of immediately off the top of my head is this thing has iDRAC. iDRAC is a module that enables you to remotely manage the server. And when I say remotely, I mean locally. I guess you could technically do it remotely, like if it was at a separate site. But in this case, we're just going to say locally. So with iDRAC, you can do things like operate the operating system. That was a little redundant. And you could also turn the server on and off, control the fans, set up a RAID array, whatever it may be. You have lots of options within iDRAC, which makes it great to have, especially at home when you don't have a monitor, or if you do have a monitor but it's like an older VGA one, but you don't really want to get up to walk over there. You can pretty much do everything you need through iDRAC. So that leads us to the next part. If the R710 is so good, why did I get the Dell T30 anyway? Well, I got it mainly because of the issues that I kind of alluded to before. So I don't know why my particular model is being so troublesome, but one of my power supplies may or may not be working correctly. I'm getting messages on the front panel here. My iDRAC module doesn't work. I've tried updating it and I'm getting errors about virtual USB not existing, or not enough, or it can't SSH into the iDRAC module to complete the update, which doesn't really make sense. And then it got so bad where iDRAC just ended up being disabled completely. Like the system services literally says it's disabled completely. One of the other issues I have is this thing is loud, really loud, and I don't think that's normal. I think that's outside of use case. I've seen all over the internet where people will claim this thing is whisper quiet, and it is quiet at times, but it's too loud to have at somebody else's house to be running 24/7. Another disadvantage is it uses a lot of power, and that's something that I kind of wanted to consider while, leaving this at somebody else's house. So with all those different problems, and they're probably having to call up my buddy to ask him to press F1 every time the thing rebooted because he lost power, or one of the many other issues that could have cropped up. It just wasn't really worth that effort, and that's really what pushed me towards seeking something else. Now I could fix a lot of that by replacing the motherboard and replacing the power supply, but once you start talking about replacing those components and paying shipping on top of that, you start to get really close to the price range of something like the Dell T30. Now, of course, I just have a bad apple, so don't let that stop you from seeking something like this in the future. But you may want to consider the Dell R720 instead. So, one final note about the Dell T30. Now, this thing is normally priced about $609 with its base configuration of a 4-core 1225 V5 Xeon CPU and its 8 gigabytes of ECC RAM, and that's pretty pricey, but this thing goes on sale pretty often, and you could probably pick it up for about $299 before tax, so we'll just say $300 for ease. Now let's go ahead and crack this thing open and see what can you actually do with this if you're going to use it as a server at home. Now looking into this case, there's not really a whole lot to see, but one of the things that I would like to make note of is that you actually have a CD-ROM drive up here, or DVD-ROM drive, whatever you would like to call it, 2 spaces for some 3.5-inch hard drives as well as 2.5-inch hard drives, and then here on the bottom are more 3.5-inch hard drive spaces. Now this particular model does come with a 1 terabyte Seagate hard drive. Let's pull that out somewhat quickly so you can take a quick gander at it. And it's actually a Barracuda, which is nice to see. 1 whole terabyte, brand spanking new. Now, just because it has space for all these hard drives doesn't mean that you can actually use 4 hard drives. Now, if you unplug the CD-ROM drive, you do have the ability to use all 4 hard drives. However, you'll have to give up that CD-ROM because there's only 4 SATA ports on this particular model, which is not really that cool. So we have the problem that we need to solve, or we need to actually fit 4 hard drives and 2 SSDs into this. Now, on the plus side, Dell has given us the power to do that. So we have 2 SATA power right here for 2 3.5-inch drives on the bottom that we will be using, and it's almost impossible to tell, but there's also another SATA port or SATA power at the very top. And then there are 3 more here. So that gives us a grand total of 6 possible hard drives we can add to this. Now what's really actually neat about this is we have a nifty adapter cable that comes right off of the motherboard here. Now this is a proprietary plug, of course, so replacing this is not impossible, but not desirable by any means. So this is a male to female adapter, or I'm sorry, female to male, and it just plugs in like that to provide additional power for our additional SATA devices. For anyone who's curious about the PCI configuration, you can see here that this is a PCI by 16. This is a full 16 lanes. This is just your PCI slot. Down here is PCI times 4, so 4 lanes. And then at the very bottom is a full length PCI slot. However, it is wired for a 4-lane slot. So you only have one full 16-lane PCI Express slot. So now that you got a pretty good idea of all the problems that you could experience with the Dell T30, let's go ahead and jump into how we plan to overcome all of that. Now, first and foremost, I do plan to use NVMe storage in my remote build, but I already have an adapter for that I was already going to use in the R710. So if the onboard NVMe M.2 slot does not work, we already have a backup plan there. Now, also from the Dell R710, I had this Dell H310 that I had planned on using in that build. Now, I'm going to need it here because, as you may have noted, that this T30 only supports up to 4 SATA devices. So we're actually going to need to use a breakout cable to get us more SATA devices, or allow us to have more SATA devices. And that's going to be the key factor here. And now that we got all that away, let's go ahead and get this thing hooked up and see what problems we run into. So while I was getting the Dell T30 prepared for testing, I figured it would be a good idea to go ahead and test to see if the Dell T30 can in fact support the Western Digital Shucked drives that you typically find from the Easy stores that is very popular online as well. So I have the 10 terabyte model and the 8 terabyte model in front of me, and we're just going to go ahead and test both for sanity reasons. So if you do shuck your hard drives at home, you'll have an answer today on whether or not the Dell T30 supports both of these drives right out of the box. And if you're not familiar with why that's important, it's because these drives have a 3.3 volt pin issue. I wouldn't really call it an issue, but the SATA power on these drives have a different pinning than you would typically find on some of your hard drives, and that causes the hard drive to not be displayed, or maybe not even be powered with some power supplies. Now, that's typically not a problem like on our Dell R710, but that could be a problem here, and we're going to find out, because eventually, one day in the long future, these drives might end up finding their way in this exact server or workstation, whatever you want to call it. So I've already moved the 1 terabyte hard drive that comes with this. I'm going to go ahead and slide in my 10 terabyte hard drive, and we're going to actually be using Windows for this particular, maybe not demonstration, but for our period of discovery, as we try to get some answers to some of the problems that I encountered while doing research on whether or not I should buy this thing. Now, I've been going back and forth on buying this thing for a while, mostly because its price, at only $300 shipped, is, well, not $300 shipped, at just over $300 shipped, is pretty fantastic and hard to beat. So I really want to hammer out some of those unknown answers and figure out quite exactly what makes this thing tick. So I'm really curious mostly about these hard drives. I don't really care too much about the I have this upside down. I don't really care too much about the NVMe drive, but I do want to know if these 8 and 10 terabyte shucked drives do work. So what else do we need to stick in here? So I need to stick in my solid state drive, and this is for our operating system. So that'll make things nice and quick. That's good enough, but that's not going to go anywhere. Now that we got our drives installed, we can boot up the T30 and see how much power it uses on boot, and then eventually how much power it uses at idle. And when I say idle, I mean it's sitting at the Windows login screen. And eventually later on in this video, you will also be able to observe how much power it uses according to UPS when it's just sitting there logged into Windows, and then also displaying the disk management screen. Fast forwarding a little bit, we can see that the UPS is reporting 0 watts of power being used by the T30. Now, I'm not sure how accurate that is, but I think that's a pretty trustworthy measurement nonetheless. So I'm using my phone to do the sound test, and it's not the most accurate tool in the world, but we can get an idea of how loud this thing actually is. But we are actually picking up more of the background noise than anything. The T30 is so quiet that the background noise is actually saturating our test here, so we're not truly able to ascertain just how silent it is. Okay, so we learned a couple things just now. So we see one drive showing up. This is the 8 terabyte drive that I have. that I thought had the 3.3 volt issue, but it does not. Apparently this drive works perfectly fine. Now you'll notice that there isn't a NVMe drive or the 10 terabyte hard drive. So now looking back at the server itself, this is the 8 terabyte hard drive that is showing up. The NVMe drive is installed. You didn't see it in Disk Manager. And also the 10 terabyte drive is up here. I actually moved it around to try different cables to see if maybe there was a difference in cables. There does not appear to be. So I would say this is totally confirmed that you cannot use the 10 terabyte white label drive or Shucked drive from the Western Digital Easy Store. Now that only applies obviously to any of the drives that have the 3.3 volt pin issue. Okay, so it's been a couple days since we last started filming, and the reason why we haven't been doing anything is because we're actually waiting for this breakout cable to arrive. So this is from SFF, or small form factor mini SAS, to SATA, and we're gonna need this if we're gonna get all those drives installed. And right now what I'm doing is trying to get the latest Dell drivers, firmware I should say, and BIOS from Dell's website for this particular model. And once we do that, I think we will be able to start putting Unraid on this and move on to the next/final portion of the video. So I'm not going to bore you guys with this part of installing firmware and yada yada yada, but I am going to do it, and if I discover anything, I will of course film it, or at least make note of it in some shape, form, or fashion. Alright, so we need to do a couple things. Obviously remove our SSD with Windows Server 2016 on it, and we can go ahead and remove some of these excess cables. I think I'm going to leave this one here. Go ahead and remove, well actually I need these two for the SSDs. So just so everyone's aware, even after a BIOS update, the NVMe drive that I plugged in here, which I'm unscrewing right now, I know you guys can't see it, still did not show up in the BIOS, nor did it show up in the operating system. So this NVMe port is completely disabled by Dell. Who would have thought? Of course they would never give you more than, they have to. So we will have to use our PCI adapter in order to use our NVMe drive. Not a big deal, but food for thought. So we're gonna stick this thing back where it goes. Oh, I cannot do this part. I have a magnetic screwdriver. Use it. Use it. Oh, why is this so difficult? We're just gonna skip ahead so you don't have to watch this torture happen. Alright, so we're going to plug in everything back here. How do you do this? Oh, there we go. That was awkward. So in our top spot is going to go our H310. Top spot. And remember, this is a full 16 lane, which we're probably never going to saturate, but I'm putting in here just because. Put that back where it goes. And we're actually going to stick the NVMe drive into our other 4-lane PCI Express slot. It doesn't really matter because, well, this is only a 4-lane adapter. And it's not like we're going to be doing any super high performance computing anyway, so I'm not really missing out on much. Wow, these things do not like to play nice with each other. Alright, and as per usual, I get most of my cables from Cable Matters, just because they always seem to have what I need in stock and ready to ship within 2 days. And we're just going to put this in the A slot. I don't think it really matters if it's A or B, but I'm only putting in the A slot because I want to have some semblance of purposeful actions. And now for the part where we just need to remove all of the drives out of here and put them into the other server. There you go, 6 hard drives, all gonna fit in the T30. So it's basically 1 for 1 slop pop. Alright, so we're basically putting in some old hard drives that I have laying around for this backup server. It's not a very important backup server, like I don't actually need to back up anything, but I'm doing it anyway. And it's going to be remote, so I'm not going to put like my best hard drives in there, at least initially. So we're currently putting in a couple 2 terabyte hard drives for parity. So obviously Unraid has parity drives. Only one of the 2 terabyte hard drives will be for parity, and the other one will not. It'll just be for storage. And then we're going to stick in a couple more 1 terabyte drives just to add a little bit more space. And I'm only going to be putting, you know, like pictures or like, I don't know, semi-important things. Maybe not even important, or important's probably not even the best word, but it's just, you know, place to store stuff, an extra place. So as the 4 terabyte Western Digital RAID drives that I have in my current Unraid server began to age or get replaced by the 10 terabyte and 8 terabyte hard drives, basically I'm going to take those out of there and then put them in here. And we'll just do that basically, I don't know, hard drive after hard drive, year after year, whichever comes first. And just one quick note, all of the hard drives in the array within Unraid, so all of them that will be in that same array, need to be on the same, maybe needs not the right word, but they should be on the same RAID card or same controller if you have it. So all 4 of these drives that are in the array will be on that RAID card, and then my SSDs will actually be on the motherboard, and that should be okay for us for this particular build. Okay, so we got all our drives plugged in. Now that's basically all that's left to do is test to see if Unraid comes up and we can see all the drives. And if we did, then I think we're pretty much done with this build. And we can move on to the next part, hopefully. Alright, so a few days have actually gone by and I ran into a little bit of trouble with the Dell T30. And the issue was that every time the server would reboot, it would prompt me to press F1 every single time. And as you can imagine, when you're rebooting something during your kind of like first installation phase, and you're always having to press F1, that can be pretty frustrating. So after getting fed up with it, I hit up Dell, and we ended up doing some troubleshooting for a little while, and they decided that it'd be a good idea to send me a new motherboard as well as a host intrusion detection cable. But this is actually a power cable, because the first package they sent was a motherboard and this cable, and as it would turn out, the new motherboard actually didn't fix my problem, and I couldn't test the host intrusion cable. So this is the actual problem child here. I didn't get that, so I had to wait another 2 days before this thing arrived, and then I was finally able to swap out cables, and wouldn't you know it, we were off to the races. No more pressing F1 every single time this thing boots up. So Unraid is installed, all of our drives are installed. Really the only thing left to do is get this thing set up to be a remote server, but that is a video for another day. So if you guys have any questions, concerns, comments about anything related to the Dell T30 or R710, let me know, because I'd be interested to know your thoughts on how the two compare. And on that note, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.